Not many people can be world number one and RS200 national champion in the same year. We sit down with one of the best all-round sailors of his generation to talk strategy, campaigning and 29er success in this fascinating interview with James Peters. Hi James, thanks for taking the time to come and have a chat with us.
Good to be here. Thanks, Nick.
So we're in Parma, you having a good time?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, we just moved over from Lanzarote to Parma, and a very familiar venue, been here many times before, and the sun's come out for us, it's slowly warming up. So
yeah, exactly. How many? 12? 11? 10?
This is number, I counted the other day, I did. This is number 11.
11.
Yeah, so like I say, it's a familiar venue. But the sailing here is some of the best you can get in Europe, so it is genuinely good to be back.
Yeah, and it's been a while since I've done it, but it always felt like somehow the hardest event of the year in a weird way. I don't know if you felt like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the first one, or everyone turns up, or
it's
I don't
the
know.
one where you see who's had the productive winter's training.
Yeah.
And some people turn up and they're fast and they're sharp and they're straight out the blocks. And they're usually the ones that have put the good program together. But equally, because it is the beginning of the season, some teams are using it to get that racing practice, and then they come on strong later in the year.
So, where did it all start for you with the sailing? Hailing, or where? What was your first kind of foray into it all?
Yeah, actually, most of my early sailing memories are on my parents' cruiser. So my older sister and I were lucky enough, we were on boats from a very young age, and we actually learned to dinghy sail when we were cruising around Brittany, and we had a little plastic yellow boat called an Escape on the front of the boat, and when we got to a nice quiet outlet, Dad used to push it off the front, and Francis and I used to go sailing around the yacht. So yeah, I guess I would have been about 8 or 9 when I started sort of doing that, and then, like you say, again, very lucky to be part of Hayling Island Sailing Club, which is one of the biggest sailing clubs in the UK, and it gave us access to lots of the best sailors in the UK. And growing up, club racing, even when we were sailing in the 29er, we'd quite often get out against some of the best adult sailors at the club. So yeah, really lucky in that sense. And
when did sailing become, or maybe it was always like this, but when did it become the thing, that you wanted to do all the time? Or is that a point? Or
there was a point, quite a specific point in time, but because I was 18 months younger than Frances, actually a lot of it in my case was driven by her, and sort of her relationship with the sport then kind of drove what our parents would take us to do. And my sister was really into performing and drama, and there was one point where there was a clash with a sailing event. I think it was an Optimist regatta in Poole, and a drama evening that she needed to go to, and she had to make the choice, and she chose to do the Optimist regatta. So off we went as a family to there, and I think we both got the bug for it at that event. It was a light wind regatta in Poole Harbour, and that was the moment, I think, where we sort of never looked back from that point, in terms of that it was going to be this thing, this professional
be the thing.
Yeah.
Cool. And hailing, I remember a small bit of it, but I always thought at hailing you'd walk around the corner and there'd be some sort of world champion, or back then. What do you think that kind of club environment did for you, and still does for you maybe in your sailing?
Yeah.
And those people, any influences?
It's massive, and maybe it's something we'll come on to talk about later, but I think that exposure to not just all the excellence we were getting through the Our Way World Class program and the access to those coaches, but just being in that adult environment with, like you say, multiple world champions. I remember a period when I was about 15 where Simon Payne had won the Moth World Championships. I think Mark Upton Brown had won the 505s. There was plenty more. And you were sort of in this, you would, at the bar, you would walk into these people in the dinghy park, and you just have a chat about how your sailing's going, and you pick it up through osmosis.
And do you think that's different now? And what do you think you'd do now if you were someone where you maybe didn't live in that place, or I know there's internet and all sorts, and how do you approach some adults to ask them about sailing? I always think that's really hard, and you might be at a club but not have the confidence to ask or the network. Like, what would your advice be for asking people questions? Or
it's an interesting one, because I can remember being as a youngster, I guess at the sort of early stages of the digital era. I can remember sort of going on YouTube and being hungry for content, wanting to see people sailing, and I think now I think we're in a better place, where everyone's got, as long as you've got a smartphone or a laptop, you've got access to that content. So I think the barriers have come down in some senses, but I do also think that there's no compromise for getting into that physical environment around those people. At your local sailing club, there's often, a reasonable sized sailing club, there's often some sailors there, some older sailors who'll be competing at a good level, a good adult level in a national class. And I would definitely be an advocate of getting stuck in and involved, and if it's just a handicap race, just pitching yourselves against them or just chatting to them on land.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I remember doing Tiger trophies and all that stuff and crewing for random adults, and it's weird, you do learn a lot through that sort of random racing. So you said there you kind of followed Frances, your sister, in a performance or in a kind of competitive sense.
Yeah.
Did you always want to go to the Olympics?
No, I don't. It wasn't really an aspiration until age, I think probably about 15, when I had a year in 29 where I sort of, I guess, reached a level of success where I suddenly started thinking about the future and looking for the next step, and then sort of looking at the 49er and thinking that's the class probably that I'm most suited to physically and in terms of my strengths as a sailor. And I think it was only then that you sort of start looking at the Chris Drapers and the Simon Hiscocks and the Stevies and Bens, and thinking, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could be an Olympian.
So that came. So how old were you when you started 29er sailing? Sort of.
I was 14.
14.
Yeah.
So it came sort of just after that time when you'd kind of competed a bit and won a few races, and is that right?
Yeah, just talking on the 29er, I can remember that feeling of getting in that boat for the first time, and it just, it planes upwind, it planes downwind, and I think there was a Christmas holiday, so I'd have been 13 or 14. There was a Christmas holiday where myself and my sister sailed. Of the 3 weeks, we sailed for 20 of the 21 days or something.
Wow!
And because we just got the bug for it, and we just wanted to go out and beat each other, and the Skiff did that for me. It gave me that excitement of I just want to get on the water and I just want to do it, and I'm doing it for fun. And of course, once you do that, and if you're competitive and you're in a good environment, you start absorbing and you start improving.
And how long? Maybe that momentum's still carrying you now, but how long did that kind of do more, get better, enjoy it more, do more, get better, be in good environments, virtuous circle kind of carry on for? Was that, how long did that carry on? Is it different now, or?
Yeah, I think it inevitably does change. I think that kind of, I suppose you could call it momentum, did carry me through for a long time. And I think when it becomes your full-time job, the game does change at that point, and your motivations quite often, because you sort of need to come from different sources at that point, and you have to be a lot more structured about how you run your campaign. And so I think, at the point where it becomes a professional job, that feeling that you get on a day-to-day basis does change.
Let's stick with maybe that feeling and the day-to-day job bit, and we can come back to the youth side of it. So how do you manage that now? Because I think a lot of people say enjoyment's really important, but I was always someone that enjoyed something that was a bit difficult and where you had to focus, and that was my enjoyment. And so how do you sort of think about that motivation and structure and the balance between having fun and being professional and planning your training? And like, do you have a kind of view or philosophy on that, or not, I suppose? Yeah,
I think when you've been out the boat for a bit, or you've been out the environment for a bit, sometimes there is the love for it is there, and you arrive back on your first day of your training camp and you can't wait to get out on the water, and you sort of hit the water, and and that can last for a couple of days. But when you're doing that full-time campaign, actually the motivation ends up coming more from, am I moving towards that end goal? And it's the cliche of the end goal is the motivation. But when you step back from that and you have your chat with your coach on the week or the days before a camp, you have to have an understanding of where that what you need to achieve in that camp and where that fits into the big picture. And when you think, okay, well, at the end of these 8 days, we need to have ticked off this list, that creates an urgency. That creates that we need to get out there and we need to do these things. We need to be in the boat park, we need to solve these problems with the boat prep. So you create that urgency or that motivation by having a structured plan, having an end goal, and then periodizing to put the camps and the time to build towards that.
I think that urgency thing is really cool, and I've always wondered how you keep maintain kind of momentum. Mm-hmm. But how do you decide what's on the list?
It's really hard because I think as sailors, or the natural tendency, I think, is to have your head full of what's just happened. So when you come back from a regatta and you didn't get the result you wanted to because you said, we weren't good enough at starting, for instance, all you want to do is go out and work on your starts. And that's okay, but you have to make sure that you keep the balance of what has to happen over the whole year versus what's just happened. And I think that's where we have some really great support in our team. We have some great thinkers in the sport and strategists of the sport that understand that big picture and understand how to help us build campaigns that keep working towards that big picture. So in practical terms, it's you have to start with a vision of what you think the gold, in our case, the gold medal 49er team looks like. And everything we do, all the goals that we create from that, the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, are working towards each of those components. So your head can be filled with this, that, or the other from what happened last week, but actually the day-to-day is driven from those core components rather than what I may feel emotional about or might be there.
And in your youth sailing, was that different? Was it about momentum? Was it a different kind of methodology, or did you start to develop any of that in your youth sailing, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think there was much at youth level, to be honest. I don't think, certainly for me, there may have been from the people around me, from the coaches and from the support staff, and probably my parents at points, there would have been an awareness of what today means in the big picture, and that perspective. But I think that is something that comes with maturity, and I'm sure some people it comes easier to some than others to have that perspective. But certainly at youth level, I think that was, I guess, coming on to that was something that I do think that if you were able to develop that skill at a young age, it would serve you very well in the long term.
And where do you think that starts? You talked there about creating kind of a vision of what you think a gold medalist can do. And is that where you start with it? That sort of visualization of what you think a world champion is in the 420, or what do they look like, or creating kind of idols? So they won the worlds last year, they were X, Y, Z. Like, what would you say the first step is in trying to create that vision?
It's interesting.
How do you do it?
Yeah, because I think every individual has probably a slightly different vision of what they think sailing a 49er perfectly looks like. But I think one obvious way that you've kind of alluded to is to look at a team that's winning, or look at a team that's won consistently over a period of years. For example, Pete Burling and Blair Tuke, and examine how they sail the boat, look at how they boat handle, how they start, how they position on the race course, and kind of drive that vision based off something around that.
You mentioned there that kind of pushing off the beach. And I remember I pushed off the beach and I felt like, how the hell could you actually sail this boat at 29er? Like, this is impossible. Yeah. And then you sort of look back and think, that was all right. Like, what are your memories of that sort of transition? I remember getting a boat and you couldn't even rig it. I mean, what's your memories of that time?
My first memory of sailing the 29er with a friend of mine, Neil Jones, from Hailing Island Sailing Club. And I remember going for our first tack, and he had done a bit of sailing in the boat, and he was quite a competent crew, but it was my first time helming the boat. And I can remember thinking, we're going to capsize. Because you go, you're sat on the side and everything was so different, and the 29 is quite a unique boat. It's quite unstable. It doesn't have much buoyancy. And so I remember thinking, we're not gonna get through this. And sure enough, we went for the tack and capsized.
And it's interesting you say, Neil, I sort of forgot you sailed with quite a few different people in different teams in that relatively short period, a few years. What do you think you learned from sailing with different people? Because that's quite an interesting thing in a two-person boat. What's your kind of perspective on sailing partners and finding the right match? And I guess as well at different times in your career and your sailing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you're young, I think a lot of your sailing partnerships tend to be people, your mates, basically, and people that you just enjoy spending time with, and you both have a passion for sailing. And I think that's great because it's so important that you sort of have that natural, you want to talk to each other, you want to spend time with each other. It's effortless and it happens. But the thing is that a great team is often that same element of enjoying each other's company to an extent, but also you need to have complementing skill sets, and you have to cover for your partner where they're weak, and vice versa. So it is an interesting one because there's a real balance there of enjoying each other's company, being mates, and really feeling like you got each other's back, but also calling them out on it if you don't agree with something, or if you think something could be done better. So there's a balance there, and that's what makes teamwork really difficult to get right.
And also I think interesting and almost ignored as a skill, I think, of how to make that right. I mean, is that something you do work on? Is that a conscious thing, or is it I'm not wanting you to disclose too much, but yeah, is that something that's
massively
worked on?
Yeah, I'm sure all the top teams would say the same. That in a team like the 49er, I think in any sailing dinghy that has more than, or sports boat, yacht, whatever, you've got more than one person in the boat. Getting the most out of both people is actually incredibly difficult to do. To not be stepping on each other's toes. If both people can be working at max capacity but not overlapping at all, you will be one of the top teams in the fleet. Because even if you have two brilliant sailors in the fleet, but they're stepping on each other's toes and they're overlapping, the end product won't be as good as it could be. And we've all seen that, expecting a team to be good and then they don't quite pull it off, and it's for exactly that reason.
You had some pretty cool success towards the end of your youth sailing. How old were you then?
I was quite young. I was only sort of getting on late 15, 16, yeah.
And that was Aarhus Youth Worlds?
Yeah.
What were those? What were the high points, I suppose?
Yeah, so Ed Fitzgerald was my crew, and Ed's a brilliant, talented sailor. Now sails in the International 14 class, a regular at Itchenor Sailing Club, and so he was local to my area. Ed and I started sailing together, and it was one of those ones where we just clicked. Immediately it was like he was a very natural sailor, made the boat go fast, and we had this magic year, sort of in the year after we teamed up through 2008, where we were always strong in light winds, and we had a light wind youth nationals, and we had a very tight battle against my sister and Claire Lasco that she was sailing with, and we then went on so we qualified for the Youth Worlds and won the Youth Worlds, and then also won the Class Europeans. So we had this magic year where we won lots. And at that point I was left in a kind of tricky situation of, do I continue, but I'm probably just going to get bigger for the 29er, or do I kind of make that transition into the 49er earlier?
And so you were 17 when you started 49er sailing?
Yeah, or 16 in the end, really. Yeah.
And what was that like? Weird.
Very weird.
Big.
Yeah, I'd gone from being, I suppose, the big fish in the small pond into a 49er squad, which at the time was full of an incredible array of British sailors. I think at that point there were 5 British teams in the top 10. All the names: Dylan Fletcher's, Chris Draper's, Stevie Morrison's, just to name the helms. And I can remember it was a daunting scenario, but you're almost, at that point, you're so young, you don't even consider the fact that you might not get there, or that it might take you X amount of years to get there. You just sort of throw yourself into it and go for it.
And how did you think about time? Because we've all been in rooms with say, it could be an 8-year journey, and I've always found that hard to compute. You sort of say there, you almost didn't think about that. You just carried on. I mean, did you ever plan it out?
There was a huge amount of naivety, for sure. And I think at the time I kind of said, this was in 2009, and I can remember thinking, 2012 is a bit of a long shot. But
we'll give it a crack.
Give it a crack, yeah. And to a degree, I think you need to have that attitude of, but I'm better than all them, But of course, what you learn as you grow and you mature is that there's a lot in it. It's not just about the sailing bit. It's about the campaigning bit and maturity, and you tend to get a lot better at that side of it as you mature.
And you went to uni, right? Bristol. So you did a little bit of full-time sailing, then went to university. And I guess there might be quite a few people watching who are thinking, what am I going to do? Can you do both? All that sort of thing. What's your perspective on it, looking back on that part of?
It's really hard. There are lots of examples of Olympic medalists who didn't go to university and that have been incredibly successful in Olympic sailing and have gone on to do other things in a whole array of different areas. There are also some examples of people that have gone to university, got their degrees, and then sort of re-entered the program and gone for it full time and been successful in Olympic sailing after as well. So there's no right or wrong answer to it, and it is definitely on a sort of personal level. You have to make that decision.
So it's sort of not only one way to do it. What do you think are the things that are the same regardless if someone's gone to uni or not? Do you think there are common things that you have to do? Not necessarily logistically, but goals or approach or persistence, or What do you think all the people that have made it have got?
Yeah, I guess stepping back just from the sort of the go to uni or the not go to uni aspect of it, I think there's what you see from the ones that either succeed in the long run or in a shorter time span is an absolute determination and a dedication to the cause. We get into the whole sort of talent argument, and you really do see that there are people that you think, they just haven't got it, but they're so determined. You override that in the long run, in the long run of Olympic campaigning, it is all about how much you're willing to put down on the table, how much you're going to commit to it, because there's enough time to get there. It's just whether you're willing to do it or not.
So there's some sort of bits of the journey, I suppose, and for people watching, they're be at different points in that. What would you prioritise at different points, I suppose, and I suppose a bit more technically sailing rather than broader? If that's too hard a question, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, because in the end, to get the Olympic medal, if that's what you want to do, then all the components have got to be in place.
Right.
You have to know how to make your boat go fast on the day. In those conditions, in that sea state, in that stability of wind, you have to be the sailor who knows how to set up the boat to get there. You have to be able to get off the start line well. You have to be able to handle the boat around the race course. And you have to be able to decide when to tack and when to jibe, how to position yourself on the other boats. And in terms of developing those skills, that can happen. They can happen at different points in your career. You tend to be, from quite a young age, I suppose you could call it a natural ability, or I'd been in an environment where I'd got a strong confidence in my decision-making ability and my sort of flair on the race course, or positioning on other boats. But it took me longer actually to always be able to make a boat go fast, and that's kind of and the 49er is a highly technical boat, so understanding the nuances of how to set it up, and so for me that's come at a much later time. But I know some other brilliant sailors who the other way around. You'd say, they always make a boat go fast. They're brilliant at making a boat go fast, but they can't start to save their life, you know, and some people are like that, and they got to develop those skills at a later point. So I think there's not a way to do that. You can see the good sailors take different pathways.
And what would your sort of advice be, or you might not want to give advice, but tips be to a 16-year-old, 21-year-old sailor? You know, you're sort of top 5 in some Grand Prix, and you think, oh, I'm pretty good at this, I'm pretty good at that. Is it to sort of accept where you are, embrace it, and keep working, or is it to kind of plan it out on a big bit of paper, or you know, how do you think the best way to sort of keep improving is at that stage and to find the next level?
I think it's always going to be a combination of those two things. You know, planning is ultimately a good thing if it's done well and done in measure, and there's always going to be that balance of have fun, get out there and do it. Well, no, hang on, let's think about what we're doing first before we do it. It's the thinking and the doing, and there's a balance between those two things. And you know, I was thinking, answering a question, what advice would I give myself as a sort of 15-year-old? And I think as young sports people, we're often very, very competitive. You know, we want to win in every situation we find ourselves in, and clearly that's an essential attribute to have as a person if you want to succeed, because a lot of the motivation comes from that want to win. But in order to improve at things, sometimes we need to let go of that desire to win, and we need to step back and say the outcome's not important. What's important here is that we experiment with something new and we consolidate that skill before we care about putting it under pressure and winning. And I think when I look back, I spent too much of those sort of early years in the 49er always trying to deliver the end product. You know, having a training session where if we didn't win, then it was like toys out the pram. It was a waste of time because we didn't win. You know, no. Like sometimes that experimentation and that consolidation could last weeks or even months. And the best campaigns will allow that to happen and not have to keep rooting it back into the outcome.
What when you look at sailing now, it's kind of changing. People are foiling. There's America's Cup is insane. Some of the Olympic sailing now is pretty mad with the foiling. What kind of excites you about the future of sailing, and what challenges do you think need to be overcome to kind of grow and keep the sport as a great thing?
Yeah, as the technologies improved and with carbon composites and the designs that have come, we've now got this massive array of high performance sailing that's become much wider than just sailing. We have a massively diverse array of things that are available to us to do. You know, with the wing foiling, the foil windsurfing, the foil supping, the foil surfing. You know, it goes on and on and on. And then of course the America's Cup and Sail GP, and it's all brilliant. I think if I've got one worry, it's about the cost and the accessibility to the sport. You know, dinghy sailing all came about, and one of the reasons that we're so great in the UK is that we've got this huge mass of sailing clubs that people have easy access to. You know, not people that just live by the coast, but anybody can go and do it and have access to it. And I think as it becomes more expensive, I'd worry about the type of people that are able to do it and what that means for our sport and ultimately the number of people participating in the sport.
And so you're not sort of saying let's drop the tech and go in slow boats, but it's sort of how can we make the fun stuff cheap? Or it's a weird mix as well, because there's travel, there's fuel, there's everything. I mean, what would if you were a policy maker, or maybe it's about manufacturers, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really hard question. I mean, one thing's for sure, you can't stop that evolution from happening. You know, it's always going to happen. It happens in every industry, not just sailing. You know, technology improves, it evolves, and with that come the changes. And I guess I just hope that as that happens, we can as a sport, we can find ways, and there will be ways of making it accessible. I mean, for example, wing foiling, although it's, you know, the equipment is reasonably expensive, it's a hell of a lot more simple than a lot of sailing things, you know, and you can pack it all into your car and you can go wing foil racing, and I'm sure that sport is going to explode at club level over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's a brilliant thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think water sports focus, not just sailing, I think could be a thing for the future. Thanks, James. It's been amazing. And good luck in Palma.
Cheers. Thank you.